Hello, and welcome back. So, this is the Return of the King, Part 2. The Return of Jesus, Part 2. So, let's get started. So, before we get into it, let's do a little recap from Part 1. So, God made man as his representative to rule over his creation. That was God's plan. That was God's plan at the beginning. That is God's plan now. He made everything. He made this physical creation and he created man. He created man as his image, as his representative to rule over this creation. But man decided to go a different way. Man decided to rebel against that. And there were three great rebellions. The first human divine rebellion introduced death and the curse into creation. So that rebellion brought all manner of things. It brought suffering, it brought disease, it brought all kind of thing, and we're now ruled by death. By the way, some may ask, well, isn't the fall of Lucifer the first rebellion? I'm dealing with rebellions that involve both humans and divine beings who came together or who jointly rebelled against Yahweh and what Yahweh wanted, especially dealing with this creation and the earth and etc. Right? So the first human divine rebellion introduced death into the creation. It was contrary to God's plan, and God has to fix it. The second human divine rebellion introduced beings who are not supposed to be here. There are beings who decided to leave their estate or leave their occultarian, their garments, change, and decided to come here. We're going to see that. Right? They decided to leave their estate and come here, and they introduced all manner of depravity. They introduced methods and means for man to destroy himself. They're not supposed to be here, and men joined with them. Okay? And the third great human divine rebellion gave rule of the creation to these beings. So God gave control of this creation to us. We decided to give control of this creation to these beings. That's what we saw at Babel, at the gate of the gods, which is what Babel means. We saw humans decide to take this creation and give it to these divine beings, to these rebellious beings. And God has to fix all of this. So we saw the disastrous choice. We saw that, God put two options in front of us, where you chose the fruit of life, obedience. You trusted Yahweh fully, and the outcome of that would be life. Because again, Yahweh does not have a credit card. Yahweh owes no one. So what you do, there is a payment for it. You do righteousness, there is a righteous payment. You do wickedness, there's a wicked payment. So what payment you get depends on the choices you make and what you do. The second option that was there was the fruit of the knowledge of good and bad, basically trusting in yourself. basically deciding to do what you like. This is my life, I will do what I want. The payment for all of that is death. Rebellion brings death. Obedience brings life. That's the choice. And our father, our great father Adam, made a disastrous one. So let's continue. So, Jesus' first coming. So, Jesus came with a mission. And early on, he decided to declare the mission. So, reading from Luke chapter 4 and verse 16, and he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Okay, so that was Jesus' mission. That was Jesus' mission. He sent me to do X, Y, Z, and to proclaim the year or the period or the age of the Lord's favor. And we will get back to that. But at the end of the day, he sent me to set things right, to set captives free, to recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed. In other words, he sent me to set things right, to fix the problems that man decided to introduce into the earth because of the rebellions. So Jesus came and he systematically fixed each and every rebellion. And now we will see how. We will see how he did that during his first coming. So let's continue. So Jesus came to fix the rebellions and to fix the effects of the rebellions. So let's look at how he dealt with the first rebellion. Let's look at the first rebellion. So the first rebellion brought death. The rebellion in Eden, the disastrous choice. All right, death was introduced to the earth, and we have been brought up to believe that we serve a God of death. Why do I say that? Because we have been brought up to believe that Christianity is all about what happens after you die. No, Christianity is about life. Christianity is about life. You'll see in the Bible it says God is Yahweh is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's the God of the living, not the dead. Christianity is about life. Christianity is not what happens after death. Christianity is about the extension and the continuation of life. But the first rebellion brought death. God does not deal with death. Let's take a look at a couple passages. And the first one is Genesis 3 and verse 2. Sorry, it's not Genesis 3 and verse 2. The first one is Exodus 3 and verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. Then Yahweh saw that he turned aside to see. God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Then he said, Yahweh is speaking here, then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. So this was God, this was Yahweh introducing himself to Moses. And he told Moses something odd. Take off your feet. Take off the sandals off your feet. Sorry, not take off your feet. Take the sandals off your feet, for where you are standing is holy ground, and you can't wear sandals. That's odd, isn't it? Yahweh doesn't do anything odd. Yahweh does everything for a reason. Let's look at a passage 40 years later. All right? So reading from Joshua 5 and verse 13. Moses is now dead, and Joshua is leading the Israelites, and he's about to lead them into the conquest of Canaan. So from verse 5, from chapter 5, verse 13. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with a drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, Are you for us, or are you for our adversaries, for our enemies? And he, the man is, and he said, No, but I am. Just taking a brief aside there. Most of the time when you see I am, particularly in the Old Testament, a lot of the time, or most of the time, it's Yahweh speaking. The Hebrew for I am is Anihu. So like when Yahweh says, I am that I am, or I am what I will be when I will be it, or I am he who lives, that's Anihu. You see in the Bible Jews being very reluctant to use this term, because it's a term Yahweh used. I am. You know, you'll generally see at most the time other people saying, no, I am the your servant is well, or you know, but they'll try to do everything but use I am. But this being is saying, I am the commander of the army of the Lord, or I am the commander of the Lord's host. Now I have come. So I am the commander, I am the head, I am the ruler of the Lord's host. Now I have come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, and said to him, What does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. This is not an angel. This is not an angel. Why do I say this is not an angel? Completely separate and aside from the fact that he uses the term I am, this being accepts worship from Joshua. No loyal angel, no loyal Elohim would accept worship from man. This is Yahweh. This is Yahweh. Now, prior to Judaism changing after the death of Christ in the Christian era, Jews or Judaism believed that in two Yahwehs, the invisible Yahweh that's always in heaven and a visible Yahweh that would frequently appear on earth, have flesh and physicality, but he was Yahweh. So one was the invisible Yahweh and one was the visible Yahweh. We Christians call that a theophany or Christophany. It's a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ, a man. He would come and he would go. He would just take on human form. And this is just that. And you notice he says the same thing to Joshua as was said to Moses 40 years earlier. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. Why is that? So we saw the invisible Yahweh appearing as fire. And now we see the visible Yahweh appearing as a man, and both of them are saying, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. Does God hate footwear? No. We have to understand what sandals are. Sandals are dead animal. And death is not allowed in God's presence. Death is not allowed in God's presence because God destroys death. God is, as I said before, Yahweh is not a God of death. Yahweh is a God of life. Bringing death into God's presence causes that death to be consumed. So, fellas, you don't want to be consumed? Take the sandals off your feet before you approach the ground that I am on, because anywhere around me is holy. And if you bring death into my holiness, that death, including you, will be destroyed, because death is not allowed into my presence. Let's take a look at another passage. And this is from Leviticus 16. The Lord spake to Moses after the death of the sons of Aaron, when they drew near before the Lord and died. So Aaron's sons came up to the Lord in an improper fashion. They came up to the Ark of the Covenant in an improper fashion, and they died. They just dropped down and died. And the Lord said to Moses, reading from verse 2, and the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place, inside the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. Because if you come into God's presence with death, you are going to die. And let's finish the passage through. We'll look at what death is. So, tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time in the holy place, inside the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. But in this way Aaron shall come into the holy place, with a bull from the herd for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put on the holy linen coat, and shall have the linen undergarment on his body, and he shall tie the linen sash around his waist, and wear the linen turban. These are the holy garments. and he shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. So let me break this down. So for Joshua not to die, he had to come with a bull, or he had to come with the corpse or the offering of a bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He had to be dressed head to foot in holy garments. All right, so he had the coat on, which is the outer garment. He had the undergarment on. He had the sash or the holy belt around his waist, and he had the headdress. So from head to toe, he is in these holy garments. Now, anything in the Old Testament is meant to teach us stuff. It's typology. So it's meant to teach us stuff. So wearing the holy garments is always speaking about righteousness. Putting on your righteousness or covering yourself. So you come before the presence of the Lord with righteous garments or with righteousness. You have to cover yourself in righteousness. But we know that the Lord is our righteousness. So we have to cover ourselves with his righteousness. We have to come with obedience, with sacrifice. So it comes with the bull and the ram with sacrifice. If you look at other passages in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, etc., you'll also see that they'll have a bell on their foot and a rope. And the bell on their foot is for the people outside of the Holy of Holies. When they hear the bell stop ringing, it means that the person is not walking around anymore, which means he's dropped dead. So they'll pull him out. Right? But the final thing says here, he shall bathe his body in water. Now, when this occurred, when all of this happened, was during the time when Israel was in the wilderness. The 40 years that Israel was in the wilderness. There's not a lot of water in the wilderness. Bathing your body is a luxury. You don't just go into, you're not in the wilderness as a nomad, moving around from place to place and just go take a shower. So bathing your body had serious effort. There were times when during the wilderness period, there were rebellions, the people murmured for water. So to take some of this precious water that you could drink or whatever and bathe yourself, that's important. Why is it important? In Israel, you see a whole lot of their religious practices. In Judaism, in the Old Testament, you see a lot of their religious practices has to do with being ritually pure. It's not about morality, it's about purity. And that ritual purity is what state you can be in to practice, or to practice, yes, but to be part of all the rituals. So you can't touch a dead body. If you touch a dead body, you're unclean, and you can't be a part of certain festivals or festivities that you're supposed to be a part of. And that is about death. You see, anything in the body that is on the body, any liquid that is in the body, that's supposed to be in the body, that's on the body, is death. So if you have a sore, and that sore may be bleeding, or it may be running pus, both blood and pus are supposed to be in the body. They are on the body, those are death. You can't come into Yahweh's presence with death on you. If you've had sex and bodily fluids are on the outside of your body, you have to bathe it off. You can't come into Yahweh's presence with that on you. That's death. You just had a child. You have blood on you from childbirth. You have the bodily fluids on you from childbirth. That's death. You're menstruating. That's death. So you have to bathe your body. You have to remove death from on you. You cannot have death on you at all. You cover yourself with holy right and righteous garments. You cover yourself with righteousness. And you come in obedience and with sacrifice. And that's the only way you can come into Yahweh's presence without being utterly destroyed. Because you have to cover yourself with obedience, with sacrifice, and with righteousness. And there must not be a trace of death on you. You must not even touch a dead body. That's the only way in the Old Testament. That's the prescription in the Old Testament, to come into Yahweh's presence and not die, because you cannot come with death. So you have one dead animal, you're going to die, because you have death on you, and you've brought death into Yahweh's presence. Because again, Yahweh does not deal with death. And if you bring death into Yahweh's presence, it will be destroyed. I am going somewhere with this. Let's continue. So we're fixing the first, Jesus is fixing the first rebellion. Let's continue. Right? So Jesus is fixing the first rebellion. So, reading from Matthew chapter 26 and verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciple and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. And he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." So this is Jesus. This is Yahweh made flesh. He isn't a theophany anymore. He isn't just taking on flesh anymore, or taking on a physical form anymore. He was born through a woman. He grew up. He has been a man for 30 odd years at this stage. And he has a choice to make. The same way Adam had a choice to make, he has a choice to make. And his choice is trust in Yahweh or trust in myself. So he's praying, "I don't want to do this. However, your will, not mine." And Adam made the disastrous choice, and he chose in himself and what he wanted. We're seeing here Jesus making the glorious choice. We see Jesus making the righteous choice, the glorious choice. the great choice. Because at the end of the day, not my will, but your will be done. This is Jesus fixing death. My will. So my will brought death, but me being obedient to your will, what's that supposed to do? Let's continue. So Adam had a choice, and he chose to be disobedient. And as I said, Yahweh doesn't have a credit card. He owes nobody. He has no creditors. You do stuff and you have your payment. Your payment comes to you. Your payment is due. And you will get it. You get your payment for whatever you do. So Adam chose to be disobedient. And the payment for that is death. And unfortunately, I chose for all of us, because all of us came out of Adam. So all of us, oh, I'm a good person, I'm great, I can do this. Nope. You are still destined for death because of what Adam did. Adam took the whole of humanity into death, because all humans came out of Adam. All humans came out of Adam. Your mother and father are descendants of Adam. So all of us have to partake in his choice. So Adam chose to be disobedient, and his payment was death. However, Jesus, the Bible sometimes refers to Jesus as the second Adam. But Jesus chose to be obedient. Not my will, but your will, O Yahweh, O God. Jesus chose to be disobedient. So Adam's disobedience brought death. And Jesus' disobedience, the payment of that is also death? No. One thing that Yahweh is and always will be is just. So Adam's disobedience brought death. The payment for disobedience was death. Jesus' obedience therefore brought life. Yahweh is not the God of what happens after I die. Yahweh is the God of life and more life. Jesus said, I have not come to condemn, but I've come to bring life, abundant life. So life here and a continuation of life after. Not living as a spirit. There's a short piece of that, but I'm living as a spirit. Let's continue. Let me don't get sidetracked here. Let's go on. So Adam's disobedience brought death. Jesus' disobedience brought life. The first time he came here, he was about destroying death. Remember what I said happens to death when it comes into Yahweh's presence. So Jesus was fully obedient, and yet he died. He was put to death. What happens? Number one, he's just, so he's not deserving of death, and Yahweh is all about justice. Number two, he's Yahweh. What happens when you introduce Yahweh to death? Well, what happens is actually death is destroyed. And we choose what type of humans we are. We are either humans born through the body, in which case we are sons of Adam, and we therefore inherit death, or we are humans who are born through the Spirit, which is all that baptism is about. Baptism is about I die and I raise again. So I die because my body came through Adam, and I die. It's symbolic. It's declaring it for the world, for all beings, and in front of Yahweh. I die, and now I've raised again, and I am basically covered by Jesus' righteousness. You be see that in the temple, the priests had to cover themselves from head to foot with righteous garments. I'm covered with Jesus. I'm covered with Jesus' obedience. I'm covered with Jesus' sacrifice. So I'm coming before God. So I am coming before God wearing Jesus. I am covered before God, covered in Jesus' righteousness, obedience, etc. When you are young and you're a child and you're at your parents' house, you are covered by the good or the bad of your parents, by the obedience of your parents or by the disobedience of your parents. And your life is basically based on that until you are on your own and doing things of your own. So you can choose to cover yourself with Jesus and not to be a part of death. Let's continue. So, Jesus fixing the first rebellion. Therefore, so Paul said, therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, nor of me his prisoner, but share in the suffering for the gospel by the power of God, who saved us and called us to a holy calling, not because of our works, but because of his own purpose and grace, which he gave us in Christ Jesus before the ages began, before time began, and which now has been manifest through the appearing of our Savior Jesus Christ, or our Savior Christ Jesus, who abolished death and brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. The one thing you have to learn if you're a Christian is to be patient, because a lot of Christianity is all about hurrying up and wait. Hurry up, make a choice and wait. Before the ages began, nothing takes God by surprise. So before the ages began, Yahweh had already, he knew that people will foul up, will mess up, and they'll have to make a choice. You see, Yahweh doesn't force anybody. Yahweh doesn't force your choices. But he has a plan, and his plan will be accomplished. So before the ages began, God already had the prescription how to fix everything. We just had to wait for its manifestation. So Jesus came, and Jesus abolished death and brought life and immortality. And if you are in Jesus, you will never see death. You will never, ever taste death. Let's continue. So, I stated that if you're in Jesus, you will never taste death. Let me explain what I mean. So, after Adam's disastrous choice, death was introduced. So you would live, then you die. And after you die, you go to Sheol or Hades. In the Bible, we see a lot of times the word hell. What we don't understand, and I've covered this in a future video, so I'm not going to get into it here greatly. What we don't understand about the word that is translated as hell, and hell is actually a Germanic word, but I've covered that completely in two videos, one about heaven, what the Bible says about heaven, and one about hell, what the Bible says about hell. So there are a few words that are translated hell, but a lot of them mean different things. So one is Sheol, all right, and that's Hebrew, and one is Greek, that's Hades. One is Hades, which is a Greek word. So Sheol is a Hebrew word, Hades is a Greek word. They both mean the same thing. They both mean the grave, or the place of death, or the place of the dead. Right? The other words for hell will be things like Tartarus, which is the bottomless pit. There's Abuso, which is also a bottomless pit. Tartarus is a bottomless pit, that's also a prison, And then there's the one we think about, which is Gehenna, which is the whole fire and brimstone and eternal suffering place. All right. So when you see hell anywhere in the Bible, you have to do a little study to find out which place is the Bible really talking about. So is it Sheol? Is it Gehenna, etc.? Right. So getting back on track, you die and you go to Sheol. Everyone goes there. All right. We see in the Old Testament, numerous people say that it's written of numerous people, they die and went to their fathers. They die and went to Hades, to the grave, to Sheol. You'll see in the passage with when Saul went after Samuel had died, and he needed advice, and God wasn't speaking, he wasn't sending a prophet. So he went to a necromancer, the witch at Endor, to bring up Samuel. And Samuel came up from Hades and said, hey, what manner is this? What craziness is this? By the way, if you look at that passage, you see the necromancer that Saul went to, when she saw Samuel come up, she was terribly afraid. Why? Because in necromancy, when these people bring up who they claim are your dead relatives, they aren't your dead relatives. They are demonic entities pretending to be your dead relatives. But this person actually saw someone from Sheol. God brought them up, and she was terrified. All right? But getting back on track, you see Jesus' parable about Lazarus and the rich man. You see they both go to this place of death. They could see each other. It's just that one side was nicer than the next. The side the rich man was on was unpleasant. And the side Lazarus was on, this Abraham's side, Abraham's bosom, that was a bit more comfortable. But at the end of the day, they were both in Sheol. They were both in Hades. They both knew where they were. They were both in the place of death. So you die and you go and wait in this place of death for judgment. So everybody, there may have been, according to the passage with Lazarus, there may have been compartmentalization of that place of death, where one is comfortable and one is not. But you are in the same place. You die and you go to the place of death. You go to the necropolis. You go to where death lives, where dead humans are. And you wait for judgment. In the Old Testament, they believed that you wait for resurrection, and either life, resurrected life, or resurrected destruction before Christ. But this was all before Christ. You had no choice before Christ. You had no choice before the crucifixion and the resurrection. After the crucifixion, after what Christ did, you now have another choice. So this was your only option before. Now you have a new option. So, unfortunately, our bodies are tainted by what Adam did. So our bodies has an expiry date. That's inescapable. So at some point, you will go through the dying process. It may not be pleasant. We can't escape that. You will go through the dying process. And this body that you presently have, you will be separated from it. But before you die, and then you go to the place of death. However, no, you die and you are immediately with Christ. You close your eyes and bow your head with Christ. You never taste the sting of death. You never taste Sheol. You never taste Hades. And you die, you're with Christ. And then you wait for the judgment. But it's a different judgment. So you die and you're always with Christ. Wherever Christ is, you are. Wherever Christ is, you are. So when Christ is in heaven, you're in heaven with him. When Christ returns, do you stay there? So you die, and from now on you're forever with Christ. And then there is the judgment. But our judgment is not a judgment of life and death. It's a judgment of rewards. It's a judgment of crowns and rewards. You either get some for what you have done on this earth, or if you've chosen to hide who you are, you get nothing, but you get life. Alright? So, Jesus came, and the first time, this is going a bit long. So Jesus came the first time, and he destroyed death. He destroyed death. At a later date, it's going to be completely abolished and made redundant, and no human will ever see death again. But we'll get around to that. But for now, you have a choice. You live as a man. You live based on you trust yourself. You make and you share in Adam's disastrous choice. You go through the dying process. You taste death in Hades. And then you wait for the judgment. And that judgment is of eternal destruction. You see, we are created from God's Spirit. That doesn't die. That never loses consciousness. So you wait for that judgment, which may be eternally unpleasant, or you choose to trust in God. Wrap yourself in Christ. You die, and you don't taste death. You're with Christ forever. Where he is, you is. And as a benefit, I keep saying God doesn't have a credit card. Everything you do here for God, there is a payment. And that payment, you'll get the rewards for it in the future. You did nothing, you probably get nothing. You'll just get your life. But you do things and God will reward you eternally. Eternally. Let's continue. So, we've dealt with the first rebellion and how Christ fixed the first rebellion. Let's look at the second rebellion. So, reading from Genesis 6 and verse 1. When man began to multiply in the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who of old, the men of renown. Now, if you're reading this passage, you'll realize that Moses is just summarizing. And people summarize when the story or the backstory of what they're talking about is known. He didn't explain the Nephilim, he didn't explain any. He just basically stated because everyone knows the story. Everyone knew the story. All right? Everyone knew this story. This is the second great rebellion, a human divine rebellion. Everyone knows the story. But there's a backstory that's been largely lost to us. And I am going to read from a document that contains the backstory. And that document I'm reading is called First Enoch. First Enoch, no one knows when it was written. But we do know that it existed at least 300 years before Christ. That's why we call it First Enoch. There's a second and a third Enoch that came about 600 years and even later after Christ. But First Enoch came at least 300 years before. And these scenes, which you'll hear me talk about in a future video quite a bit, or reference quite a bit, and I've probably referenced them before in the first video. These scenes stated that it's been around for quite some time. Why it's going to come in this, I usually only quote the Bible. But when the biblical writers quote someone else, I will quote that someone else. And Jesus quotes First Enoch. Paul quotes First Enoch. Jude quotes First Enoch directly. Peter quotes First Enoch. I can't remember if John does it as well, but the others do. So I'm going to read this passage, or the backstory of this passage from First Enoch. Let's continue. So reading from First Enoch. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied in those days, were born unto them beautiful and come daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Shemyaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty for this great sin. And they all answered to him and said, Let us all swear an oath, and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations or mutual curses. So let's all swear ourselves and bind ourselves. We all going to partake in this great sin, and we all will pay the price for it together. Alright, so let us swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together, and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared, on the summit of Mount Hermon. I think, if memory serves me correctly, Jared was Moses' grandfather. Alright? So, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders: Samlazaz, their leader; Arakalbal, Ramilil, Kokablel, Tamlel, Ramlel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakiel, Asiel, Amaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zaklel, Samspiel, Satarel, Torel, Yomyael, Sarael. These are the chiefs of tens, and all the others together with them took on themselves wives, and each chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms, reading again from 8, and they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And continuing, and they became pregnant, and they bare great giants whose height was 300 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. Then the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray, and they became corrupt in all their ways. Shemyaza taught enchantments and root cutting, Amoros the resolving of enchantments, Barachial taught astrology, Kokabel the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arachiel the signs of the earth, Samsiel the signs of the sun, and Sariel the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. So, this is the backstory for Genesis 6. We see all these people, they are mentioned all throughout the Old Testament, where they left their former estate. Essentially, they left being what they were, and they took on these human-like bodies. And they took wives, and they did all manner of things. And as we see, they have brought and they have taught every wickedness, astrology and warfare and drugs and mind-altering substances, and have led men into degradation. And men joined with them. At first, men even fed them, and then when men couldn't feed, or at least they fed their offspring, and when men couldn't do that anymore, they these offspring, these giants or whatever, consumed them, according to this passage. And there's a lot of this in the book of Enoch. There's a lot of this in the book of Giants, which is also known to have been written or at least known to have existed 300-400 years before Jesus. So this is the backstory. We have these people who are not supposed to be here. So this is the first time in the Bible that we see these individuals are not supposed to be here. And then after the flood, we start to see a next group of beings appear. Those are demons. So we see the Nephilim, we see the angels, 200 plus angels rebelled on Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is important. We see 200 of them rebel on Mount Hermon. We see the Nephilim created because of them. And then after the flood and whatever, and the actions of men, we don't see Nephilim anymore, but we see demons. Demons are excuse me. Demons are thought to be the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim who died. We only see demons after the flood. We don't see them before the flood. With their rebellious angels, And then there are demons. So devils and demons. Rebellious angels are never looking to take over a body. Demons always are. So there's a difference between two of them. The demons are thought to be the rebellious, or the Nephilim, who died. They didn't come from God, so they don't go to Hades. They don't go to the place where humans go to wait for judgment. And they definitely don't go to heaven. So where are they? They're here. All these beings are not supposed to be here. And this rebellion between these beings who decided to come down on earth, on Hermon, who decided to leave their state, come down on Hermon, has led man to all manner of deprivation and degradation. And Jesus has to fix that. Let's continue. I'd like to read from a particular psalm. It's Psalm 22. It's a messianic psalm. It's also a prophetic psalm. Because if you read the psalm, it seems to be the psalm or the cryings of someone who is going through a torturous time. This is a prophecy and a foretelling of Jesus on the cross, which is why Jesus quoted it on the cross. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? So let's read from Psalm 22. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me, and from the words of my roaring? O my God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season I am not silent. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee, and were delivered. They trusted in thee and were not confounded. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, and despised of the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, trusted on the Lord, that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. But thou art he that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was upon my mother's breast. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my God from my mother's belly. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They gaped upon me with their mouths, as a ravening and a roaring lion. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me. They gaped upon me with their mouths, as a ravening and a roaring lion. The bulls of Bashan. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws, and thou hast brought me into the dust of death. For dogs have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I may tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me. They part my garments among themselves, and cast lots for my vesture. This is a psalm, a prophecy of Jesus on the cross. But be not thou far from me, O my God, my strength. haste thee to help me. Strong bulls of Bashan. Jesus is on the cross. And when he was on the cross, he made sure people realize, hey, you see, about 600 or 1,000? I think it's 1,000 years after Jesus, the Bible was separated into books and chapter and verses. But in the times of Jesus and before, when you want to quote a scripture, you start reading a part of it. So Jesus is in agony. He's on the cross. He has to struggle, and excuse me. You see, when you're on the cross, crucifixion is a manner of torture that you don't survive. Right? You choose between extreme pain or being able to breathe. So when Jesus said anything on that cross, pay very special attention to it. So in those days, when you want to quote a scripture, you start reading from part of it. So on the cross, Jesus said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, meaning, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? He quoted this. And in this passage we see, many bulls have compassed me, the strong bulls of Bashan. Bashan is a place in northern Israel. It's the area around Mount Hermon. It's the foot of Mount Hermon. We just read about Mount Hermon, which is the place where the rebellious Elohim descended. And we're going to read about Mount Hermon again. Right? But Bashan is that area, and it has carried a number of names over the years. The names have changed. It's called Bashan. It's been called Banias. It's been called It's been called Bashan. It's been called Banias. It's been called Panias, and it's been called other things. But let's continue. And I'm reading here from Mark chapter 8 and verse 27. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, who do people say I am? And they told him, John the Baptist. Another said Elijah, and others, one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say I am? And Peter answered him, saying, you are the Christ, or you are the Messiah. And he strictly charged them not to tell no one about him. And he's charged them to tell no one about it. This occurred in Caesarea Philippi. Now I stated that Bashan has had many names throughout the years. In the time of Jesus, Bashan was called Caesarea Philippi. Bashan is still existing now, of course. It's just that it has a different name. These days it's called the Golan Heights. Alright, let's continue. Jumping down to Mark 9 and verse 2. And after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became radiant, intensely white, and no one on earth could bleach them. As no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah and Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, and one for Moses, and one for Elijah. For he did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And a cloud overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, this is my beloved Son, listen to him. And suddenly looking around, they no longer saw anyone with them but Jesus only. So he went up to Caesarea Philippi. He asked his disciples, who? Now remember, Jesus knew fully well he was being watched by beings that you're not necessarily seeing. But we are always surrounded by these beings. And Jesus asked them, who people say I am? So some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say one of the prophets. But who do you say I am? And Peter said, you are the Christ. And Jesus did not disagree. So Jesus essentially saying, yes, I am the Christ. I am the Messiah. I am Yahweh made flesh. Don't tell anyone. But what did Jesus just do? He basically was telling everyone who we cannot see around him, I am Yahweh, I've come. And I come for you all. I come to fix the second rebellion. I come to put you all out. I'm serving you, and you guys notice your time has come. Then 6 days later, just in case they thought that he was joking or bluffing, 6 days later, he went up a high mountain in Caesarea Philippi. Alright? I did a video, one of my early videos last year, and it's called Divine Rebellion Part 2, and I have pictures of it. In Caesarea Philippi, there's a very high mountain. That's Mount Hermon. These days, that mountain is still there. It's sometimes called the Eyes of Israel. Israel has placed a bunch of high-tech listening devices and spying devices on the top of it. It's called the Eyes of Israel. So he took these people up this very high mountain, the same mountain. Because if you look at Caesarea Philippi, it's or Bashan or the Golan or whatever you wish to call it, it's dominated by a very high mountain. Same mountain, more than likely the same mountain, Mount Hermon. And there he unveiled himself. He unveiled himself. So if you didn't know who I am yet, look me, I'm here. This is time. Judgment has come for you guys. I've come to reclaim and to evict. And there's a passage, I haven't quoted it here. Alright? There's a passage I read from Mark, but if you read this from Matthew, he tells Peter, right, after Peter says, you are the Christ, he says, yeah, flesh and blood hasn't revealed this, but, the Spirit of God revealed this to you. And on this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And we have thought for years that this rock that he's referring to is Peter, because Peter's nickname was, Peter means rock. But this is Jesus using wordplay. If you are on, he didn't say, okay, sorry about that. So, Bashan, right. So Jesus basically, in Mark, stated that upon this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And we've assumed that it's Peter because Peter is rock. But this is Jesus using wordplay. If you stand up, he didn't say, you are Peter or you are rock, and upon you I will build my church. No, he said, you are rock. You are Cephas. You are Peter. So you are rock. But on this rock, what's this rock? If you stand up in Caesarea Philippi, Bashan, Panias, all these are the name of the same place. If you stand up there, you are dominated by a huge mountain, by a huge rock. So the same rock that the rebellious angels came down on and brought depravity and degradation to man, that same rock I will build my church upon. And the gates of hell is literally a place. Because in the time of Jesus, every religion on the planet had a temple at the base of Mount Hermon. And then there was this giant cave. There was this big cave. And if you go and watch Divine Rebellions Part 2, I have pictures of this big cave. That big cave was literally called the gates of hell, or the gates to the underworld. Remember I stated, hell has a couple different meanings. So the gates to the underworld. In Greek mythologies and other mythologies, The underworld, or the necropolis, or the place of the dead, was ruled by a god. And it was sacred. So the gates of hell will not prevail against it. This was Jesus, one, picking a fight, and two, letting people know in no uncertain terms, because Yahweh is afraid of nobody. Right? This was Jesus letting people know in no uncertain terms who I am. And I'm here to start the fixing and the judgment. And this was done. So when Jesus stated that on the cross, hey, I am surrounded by the strong bulls, not just bulls, the strong bulls of Bashan. I am surrounded by powerful, devilish and demonic entities. I made sure that they know I am here. I made sure that they know who I am. And if you continue reading Mark, right after this, he goes to Jerusalem and he dies. He made sure he went to pick a fight. Jesus went here to pick a fight. I am Christ. I'm come to wipe you out. And they stupidly killed him. Paul said that if they knew what would happen, or if they knew what we know now, they would never have killed the Lord of glory. Because what did they do? Right after this passage, Jesus went to Jerusalem, he was crucified, and he died, and they stupidly introduced death to Yahweh. And I've kept saying from the beginning of this video, when death is introduced to Yahweh, death is destroyed. So Jesus fixed the first rebellion by destroying death. And this is the second rebellion. He has come to serve eviction notices. And he has served eviction notices. If you all didn't know who I was, if you all had any doubts, this is who I am. Okay, I am telling my disciples I'm the Christ in your earshot, but just in case you don't believe me, I've unveiled myself. He transfigured and he let a piece of his glory shine out. He didn't let all, otherwise, there wouldn't be a Peter, James, and John. They probably died. But he just let a bit of his glory from the ages, from before the time before the ages, shine out, so that everybody, the rulers of this world, will know who he was and know that their time is up. But let's continue. And I want to read another passage here, just to solidify certain things. And when he came to the other side of the country of Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men met him. 2 men possessed by demons met him, coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" They know, all these entities know that God isn't a liar. That they know that their judgment is coming, and all they try to do is prolong it. Have you come here to torment us early, to torment us before the time? Now a herd of many pigs were feeding at some distance from them, and the demons begged them, saying, "If you cast us out, send us away into the herd of pigs." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out, went to the pigs, and behold, the whole herd rushed down a steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the waters. They were afraid that he would send them at the other place. They were afraid he would send them to the Aboso, to the abyss. Remember I stated that there are about a few words for hell, that's all translated hell. One of them is the abyss, and they're terrified of that. Abyss is the prison that God sends these rebellious Elohim and some of these disembodied Nephilim, these demon spirits. They're terrified of that, and they're terrified of what is to come at the final. Yet men aren't terrified for whatever reason. So that's the second rebellion. In the first rebellion, Jesus came and he destroyed death. He destroyed death. And once we are with Jesus, we don't taste it. We don't taste it. We unfortunately have the dying process, yes. Because of Adam, we have issues with his body, and Jesus is going to resolve that as well. But death, we don't taste it. That sting of death, that's gone from us. We don't taste it. We close eyes, we open eyes somewhere else. And the second thing, these beings, these squatters, these illegal immigrants who are here, who are not supposed to be here, and who have taught us how to destroy ourselves. Yahweh, Jesus has come. He served them notice. They are evicted. They are evicted. And what has to come? The eviction notice is served. Execution is coming. So there's a new king. There is a new king. There is a new ruler. Remember, I stated that God's plan was to create this creation and give it to men to rule. And men messed that up through 3 divine rebellions. So this is the last bit of the first coming. So reading from verse 16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. This was just before Jesus left. The final thing he did on the first coming. Final words he spoke as a man on earth, his first coming. From verse 17. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I am now the ruler of all. I am now the king of all. Heaven and earth. So, I am now everywhere and the ruler of all things. Yahweh is now the ruler of heaven and earth, because Yahweh is Yahweh, but he's now also a man. So he's the new ruler of earth. He is the new controller of earth. There is a new king. There's a new owner of the earth. And that's to deal with the third rebellion, which we shall cover in the next video. So that's it for Return of the King Part 2. It went a bit longer than I expected, but it is what it is. Please look out for Part 3. I'm trying to do these videos. It's a 4-part series. I'm trying to do them and release them as quickly as I can, all around Christmas time. So please look out for Part 3. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it, and God bless. Thank you.